To assist me in introducing the next speaker, I have Hope Medina. Hope is an active ICC member and code specialist and participates also on the Sustainability Membership Council. Thank you, Hope.
It is my privilege to announce our next speaker. Mr. Ommid Saberi is Senior Industry Specialist on Green Buildings in IFC Climate Support Services based in Washington, D.C. The technical leadership of EDGE, an online application training and updates to the EDGE certification system are part of Mr. Ommid's responsibilities, along with working on EDGE green building certifications of projects globally. Before joining IFC, he has had extensive experience advising on sustainability strategies for property development projects in the UK, Middle East, and Asia. He was the head of the Sustainability and Energy team in WSP Group Middle East. He is an architect and building physicist with 16 years of experience on sustainable design and practice. He has been the head of many design and research teams internationally, including many projects in the Middle East and Asia. For an example, development of green building codes for several countries from Asia to Latin America. He has also been a member of regional government advisory panels as an expert in low energy designs and technical director of energy conservation at the city scale. More generally, he has experience working with companies in the private, public, and governmental sectors, which give him a wide understanding of current and future environmental and sustainability challenges. Please step forward.
Thank you very much. It's my honor being here. I want to start with thanks to ICC for inviting us here, and it's a pleasure to share some of the background experience that we've done in the last few years. And the more that we go, the more we learn that we don't know enough, and hopefully we can share some of these gaps that we have and learn how to do better in future together. So you may ask why World Bank is in this business, why we are speaking about these elements, and as a financial institutions, what is the incentive for us to get into these? The first answer is that World Bank, one of the main missions of World Bank, there are two missions for World Bank. One is to reduce the poverty, and the second is to increase the shared prosperity. And under reducing poverty, one of the main elements for us is to fight climate change. And to fight climate change, we have specific programs, and those programs are diverse globally. And one of them specifically talks about buildings and greening the construction sector. And that's basically the reason why we are discussing codes and green buildings. Under the program, we have one of the elements that helps us to navigate through different environments is a multi-pronged approach that we are trying to take. Obviously, my colleague Fred giving me a very good analogy yesterday that it's like an ocean, and when you are entering to this ocean to heat up the ocean, obviously you can't boil the entire ocean. You need to start from a corner and then develop. For us to ensure that we are attacking the element from different angles, we started to work with governments, obviously government regulations. We have direct investments in projects that those projects we are working with them to make them green. We also have direct investments in materials and suppliers and how they are producing materials, so that's another angle that we are helping. And also we have a certification system that we are encouraging the market leaders to adopt the certification system. So these are some of the channels that we are trying to approach the market from. And by doing that, we are hoping that we can bring the owners to recognize, we bring the governments and financial sector as well. That's another element that I will discuss a bit further on that. However, when you look at the projects that being built in emerging markets, and our mission is to work on the emerging markets only. When you look at emerging markets, this is an example in Addis Ababa. These are the buildings that are being built today. This is 2016 image. The problem you can see in these buildings is that lots of elements that are basics like fire safety, seismic safety, or efficiency are not built to these buildings. What happens is that in principle, these buildings are becoming a house for unhealthy and unsafe environment for years to come. You know, the previous speaker was talking about at least 60 years life cycle of the buildings. And obviously we are looking at 60 years or more for these buildings. And if they are not built to standard, they become a danger or a risk for next 60 years. And again, mentioning that attacking existing buildings is much, much more difficult than new buildings. So the risks built into these buildings will remain for years to come. From the different approach of looking at the issues in terms of disaster, we are looking at disaster and problems that happens like a hurricane or storm that comes at one point and washes out a city. But on the other hand, we are looking at problems like fire that happens in these buildings on and in different times. Maybe it doesn't get the media attention. In the media, you wouldn't hear every day that this house was on fire or the other building was on fire. You probably would hear it here and there. Or, you know, examples in Middle East that kids fall down from a window of 30-floor building and they die. They would not get much media attention, but they are risk for health. Here, what I'm trying to speak is specifically on resource efficiency. So there are other elements that we are also covering on resilience, but my focus would be only on resource efficiency. To have these programs up and running, obviously we need an environment of legal, we need the implementation systems, and we need the code. And obviously the experience here in the United States can be helpful very much in many of these countries which they are starting from scratch almost. But the point here is that if we look at the building sector, in the building sector we have the top leaders in all the markets. When you go to any of these countries, if there's a headquarter of a bank or there's a headquarter of any international organization, they may build to standards and they build quite high quality buildings, hopefully. But then you have a majority of the building, maybe more than 99% of the buildings, that they are the problem. Those are the ones that we need to catch. And one of the ways to catch is to start from the base and increase the base in terms of the basic standards. And that's where the codes come in. And our view of the codes is that they need to be really simple for these countries. They need to be actionable, business focused. We were talking about how expensive can be to build a code, build a building to a code. So how we can make sure that the code that we are writing has the lowest cost possible and has the highest benefit at the same time. So cost and benefit analysis is a key point. And the other fact is inspection, how we can make something that is easily inspectable. One of our colleagues, Russell, always coins this word of drive-through inspections. Drive-through inspections is that if you're driving next to a building, you can say roughly that this building is built to code or not. So how we can make elements of the code that are easily inspectable. Why this is important in that context is that the more complex we write the codes, the room for corruption, the room for cheating is higher. So we really need to make it simple so that it's easier to track if there is a wrongdoing in the system. So far, we've worked on a few countries. We started with Indonesia back in 2010, 2011. The code there has been released at national level, but also we are working with the specific cities like Jakarta and other cities on the code implementation. Then we moved on to Vietnam, Bangladesh, Colombia, and we are working with different countries. So in some countries, code has been only for energy efficiency. In some countries, we had energy and water efficiency. And in some countries where they request to have water, energy, and some other elements like waste management. So this is the way that we started. Our focus was on energy and then water. These are the two main focus. But other elements, we try to avoid them if possible. If there's a local need, then those elements being built into the system. So far, we had around 10 million square meters of buildings built to these codes in the countries. So how we are doing this? Before the life cycle of this work starts from what happens before the code. How we are starting before entering to a country and discussing around the code. So the main question there is that what kind of research and preparation needed before doing the code in a country. Then we do the code development and how the code can be more impactful in a specific context. Obviously, context here is extremely important for us. And then what would be the mechanism for enforcing the code and what would be the next elements. And I'll go through these one by one. So how we are selecting these countries, why we are, let's say, working in India but not working in another country. So one of the ways for us to look at the countries is to look at what is the country's growth in the number of buildings that they are building each year. So then the growth in the country is one of the factors we are looking at. We are looking at how expensive the energy is in a specific country, and we are looking at how dirty the energy is in a specific country. If a country is producing a lot of power using coal power plants, their energy, their CO2 intensity of grid would be highest. Therefore, we are trying to categorize countries, and in this graph you see the ones that goes to the right-hand side and up, they are the highest priority country for us. And then we move on to the other priorities. It's hard to read, but China, India, Philippines, they are on the right up. In terms of the next step before the code is for us to figure out what is the long-term roadmap. There is no way for anyone to enter to a specific task and come out within a year or 2 or 3 or 5. We need to have a long-term vision of where this country needs to be in 20 years, 30 years, and what are the steps toward that. And the way that we call it what are the baby steps to needs to be started from and then being built on, rather than starting from a very large task. So we start with the smaller tasks and then we build over that. The other important point is that we need to understand what is the current status quo. So in some of the countries, there are already codes, there are already processes in place, and we can learn from those processes and build over those processes. So for example, this is the Indonesia plan. There's a plan for 2030. And under this plan, there's a specific requirement for saving 30% on energy, water, and CO2 emissions. So there is a roadmap that what needs to be done, how many revisions needs to be done to reach to that 2030 plan. So it's basically a step-by-step process. But in this stepping process, I emphasize that we start with simple steps first. And going back to the analogy of the ocean by Fred, instead of us going very deep in the ocean and very wide in the ocean, we go with the low depths and a wide audience, rather than, because otherwise we never have enough resources and we never have enough capacity to deliver. This is a good slide to make sure that you cannot read it. So this kind of shows the steps of starting from policy and going to capacity building and knowledge management and helping the knowledge and awareness to be built up in the system. In terms of stakeholder engagement, how we are ensuring that we talk to the different players in the game, obviously government officials, inspection systems, building permit authority, speaking to engineering and architectural associations, and all the players and also material suppliers. In some areas we have problems with supply of specific materials. So all of these, they come, we identify the gaps, we work with also discuss the targets and if those targets are possible and viable. But also we discuss the lessons learned from other countries. If we made a mistake in a specific country, then we say we have done this mistake, let's not repeat this mistake. If we go through this route, we wouldn't get anywhere. So let's not repeat that mistake. The type of codes that are being developed so far, we are looking at a lot on prescriptive. Obviously, there are 4 types of codes. I'll explain very quickly what they mean. Prescriptive is that we need to specifically define what elements we want to be, needs to be built into the buildings. Performance is more around, okay, we want these buildings to be 20% better than a baseline. The performance-based models are being used in the United States and Europe, but when you go to a specific emerging markets, it's very difficult to build the expertise of energy modelers and people that they can use this method. The other one, which I am a fan of, which is the cap-based, but it's very, very difficult to manage. In Italy, for example, they use this at a specific, saying that your building has this much energy budget and this much water budget. Do whatever you want to do, but you can't exceed the budget. But that element is not that easy to be implemented. And then there's a combined between prescriptive and performance. In some countries, they tend to use a combined method as well in our codes. So to do the code, what we do, we start with building surveys. We start hiring consultants to go to the buildings. They go and survey, pretty much similar to the work that's done here today morning. What is the current insulation condition? What is the current water condition? What is the current roof conditions? All the details will be studied and the consumption. Using that, we come up with a baseline for a specific country, for a specific building types. We also look at the cost in different countries. And using all of these, then we come up with a list of measures that can be applied to a specific country. But this is very important graph to mention. But after identifying, let's say, 40 or 50 things that can be done in a specific building type, then we come up with this graph. What this graph means, it means that what is the potential for saving for a specific measure? So for example, if I use a better cooling system, what would be the highest potential saving that I can get out of better cooling system? If I use the better lighting system, what would be the potential for saving on better lighting system? And so on, all the way to having a small detector, occupancy detector, everything. And at this point, then we come up with this point that anything that saves, let's say, less than 1% in the highest potential, let's ignore those. Why we say this? Because we want to come up with maybe 5 or 7 elements that saves the highest with the lowest cost, rather than going with 40 or 50 elements that can save. So that's the first filtering for us. The second filtering is the cost. So then we look at what is the cost and payback for a specific element. If I install this kind of lighting, how many years it takes for it to pay back? If the payback is more than 5 years, again, ignore it. Let's put it aside. Also, we are looking at total cost increase in the building. If the total cost increase in the building more than 3 to 4%, let's again ignore it. So we put all of these together to come up with distilling solutions to maybe 5 solutions that gives us 30%, 20% saving in the building with the lowest cost possible and lowest payback possible. That's the logic we go through. And that's the step 1 of the baby steps that we are trying to take. This is an example of, for example, in Indonesia, in Jakarta, we realized that thermal conductivity of the building, because the temperature difference between inside and outside is very small due to a specific climate condition, pays back in around 98 years. But a more efficient system can pay back in 5 years. So you can see each of these elements. The greens are the ones that pay back in a very short term. The reds are the ones that pay back long term. And the oranges are mid. And after analyzing these elements in detail, then we come up with a list of measures that can save in different building types, and there's saving potential for each of those. So this then shows what is the accumulative increase in the cost and what is the accumulative saving potential for each building type. For example, in a retail, there's 2% increase in the cost, there's 15% energy saving. In the offices, 5% increase in the cost, 25% reduction in the energy consumption. So this is the outcome of all of the measures together. Then we look at the obviously legal and political elements of signing with the ministries and bringing them to approve the code in the legal processes. Then the element of training, we have trained 2,000 people in Indonesia, the building officials, code officials, to ensure that they understand what is the code requirements and they can enforce that. Then, yesterday we were discussing around how ICC produces different user guides and essentials to explain how the code can be demonstrated in a very simple way, with pictures and with graphs and simple language. And that's the user guides that are being prepared, and there would be checklists prepared as well. But also we do some pilot projects. So those pilot projects are the real case projects that code will be built in to, again, understand what are the challenges in building the code into the buildings. And finally, evaluation of the results. Measuring that which ones are being built. We are using a semi-digital and analog system. In lots of these countries, we have issues with internet connectivity. Therefore, we are trying to use an Excel-based checklist to detect what are the elements being applied. Examples of the checklists. And then we also, after the code, we introduce, put these codes in an internet base so people, they can download it for free. They can access the checklist and download them. So these are the elements that are being built after the code development to ensure that those data is available to people. In terms of, I'll touch base on incentives later on when we come to the financials. Raising awareness, obviously there are programs on going to different universities and explaining how these codes can be beneficial for the country. And finally, the monitoring. We want to monitor the buildings that after they're being built to ensure if there is saving or if there is not saving, and see whether there's any benefit of applying these codes into the buildings. So in summary, what we are trying to do, trying to make the code simple, trying to make them cost-effective and localized. Those are the three main messages that we want to deliver in the codes. But then very quickly touching base on, okay, what is the certification system and how the certification voluntary system ties into the mandatory code development. We have a program, we call it EDGE, which stands for Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies. It's a voluntary mechanism for certification similar to LEED and BREEAM and other certification systems. And the idea here is that, again, going back to the marketplace, when you have the top leaders in the market, how we can bring the others that are not that high, but they want to differentiate themselves in the market. And that's how EDGE comes into the play. EDGE is very simple in approach. We are making it quite affordable for people to use, and it's very business focused. And we want to make it specific for emerging markets. EDGE has been applied in 7 countries specifically, and is available for 125 countries globally to be used. The main question in developing the EDGE tool was that how we can make, similar to the same logic in the code, how we can make designer aware of their decisions. If I use this specific lighting, what is the payback and what is the benefit to my client? And that's the main question we want to answer. On the EDGE, we are providing a free-to-use software, which is available online on edgebuildings.com. For these countries to use them for free. We are not charging anything, and we will not be charging anything. Some people, they are worried to touch our software. They say, oh, you want to charge us in future. No, this software, we are trying to keep it for free for use. There is a 20% saving from the baseline, and baselines are specific to each country. And that if you pass that 20% saving on energy, on water, and embodied energy of the materials, then you meet the EDGE standard. Then you can certify the building by EDGE. And certification comes with international certification providers. An idea, as I said, is that what is the cost and what is the saving? These are the two main questions. When you talk to any client, the first question they ask is that what is the cost of doing this? And what is the benefit of doing this? So instead of us telling them that you will be saving 12 kilowatt hour per square meter per year, which doesn't really mean anything to them, we will tell them the cost of this is $100,000 and you are saving $20,000 per year. So they can understand what is the cost and what is the benefit to them. This is the way that software works. Basically, there's a baseline base case on the left-hand side, that graph, and the right-hand side is your building, and there's list of measures that one can select from. Once you select any of these measures, you can see the saving, you can see the cost, the increased cost, and utility cost reduction. All of these will be given in a specific country context. So it's not a global average, it's a specific country context. And that helps people to decide if those elements make sense for them. For example, if I add external shading, what is the cost and what is the benefit for my building? And edge comes at a design stage and post-construction stage at two levels. We have 2 global certifiers. We have an agreement with US Green Building Council, GBCI, that they provide edge certification globally. And we have an agreement with ThinkStep and SGS. They are another global provider for edge certification. They provide certification, let's say in Nigeria or everywhere in the world. And we have a specific country programs in the specific countries, and 7 countries we have a specific country programs. And this is the way that certificate will look like, with reporting savings on energy, water, and embodied energy. We already have more than 100 buildings certified. We started 2 years ago, so it's a very young program, the edge certification, but we are seeing a very good pickup in the market. Here, I want to mention that we are partnering with a lot of international organizations, but also, most importantly, with financial institutions. The financial institutions so far have been kind of at a sleep mode. They had some green credit lines in some of these countries or green mortgages, but they never been able to disperse that money, and they were kind of disappointed that they can't do anything with this money. So we are bringing those players into the game that, okay, now you can recognize EDGE certified or LEED certified or a specific building typologies as green, and then you can disperse your monies. For bankers, at the end of the day, they want to give out their money, but they want to know how to do this. And last thing they want is to send their loan officer to a building, and they would figure out why this building is green or is not green. So giving them a specific rules and eligibility criteria is quite important. But also we are working with, for example, Radisson as hotel operators. They committed to use EDGE for all their new projects in emerging markets. We are working with HOK, they are the designers, and they're also using EDGE for verifying their buildings, new designs in all emerging markets. So it kind of gives us that access to a wide range of clients. Finally, I want to mention around one other element that is important from World Bank point of view. We are also working on other financial products like green bonds that provides better investment opportunities for green projects. Green bonds are now recognizing green buildings under green bonds, and has been a very, very good pickup of number of projects being third-party certified as green projects. We also direct investment we are doing with banks. For example, in Turkey, we have a bank that provides green mortgages. And it's not all World Bank. We are bringing other financial institutions like KfW, FMO, CDC, that they will contribute to these projects as well. So with our work, it would be a drop in the ocean, and that's why we need everybody to come and help so that we can move the needle. I stop here and for any questions. Thank you.
Do we have any questions here? Yes.
So in terms of the life cycle
Thank you, Chuck. That's a very good question, really good question, and we have seen this problem occurring again and again. The fact that the way we are providing this program is to ensure that it's like in car manufacturing, to produce a car that consumes less energy in production. And whether the driver is driving it good or bad, that's another question, right? The operating systems. As an example, in South Africa, we have seen low-income housing being built without any heating or cooling system, and they are being built with quite a poor envelope condition and very poor ventilation condition. What happens in these houses is that they get really overheated in the summertime, and people either suffer, or they install fans, or they install air conditioning systems. This is one of the options out of it. So here what we are trying to make sure that the window sizes are correct, the ventilation size is correct, so that if the occupants changes, they still can enjoy better indoor environmental quality by openings and by better envelope, rather than designing an inefficient system that even if the, in the equal conditions, when you have a badly performing envelope, then the occupants changes, it doesn't matter, they would still suffer or consume more energy. But in terms of operation, you're absolutely right, it's a different story, and it's a very important story to tackle, and we haven't really touched it yet. What I can say is that we started the program for Indonesia. The starting point was 2011, and still the program is going on. So this training has happened throughout these years, maybe in last 3 years, but the money that we spent, I don't know. So in terms of the design professionals, I give you an example in terms of the voluntary system, because we have seen this problem in the voluntary system larger than in the codes, because the codes are relatively simpler than voluntary system. What we've seen is that the training, when you only train the officials, is not enough, and you need to bring the other side of the table into the training as well. Our view is to work with architectural associations and engineering associations to enable those trainings. Those trainings are, so far we haven't been able to do much of the training, but we've seen what happens is that when the clients, they want to do this, and they talk to their design teams and they don't know what to do, that's the problem, that's the bottleneck, that then things do not happen. Obviously, in a mandatory system, when you say that this is mandatory, what happens is that then design team, they need to panic and figure out what to do. But in a voluntary system, it's more obvious, because if the design team doesn't know what to do, they normally say, maybe this is not the right idea, maybe this is, there's better things to do, and then they convince the client not to do it, right? So that's why we see bigger barrier in the voluntary system, less barrier in the mandatory system.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask my question here. One of the things you had mentioned was the importance of the thermal envelope, and I've had the privilege of playing with Edge and checking out, you know, different countries and cities and so forth. It appears that the value and emphasis on the thermal envelope does not come through on it. If you click on, because you're trying to get the 20% better in your payback and so forth, if you click on your walls or your insulation value, you get almost nothing in regards. But if you don't have a strong thermal envelope, you're always going to be leaking and causing more energy usage and so forth. So are these, or is this software where it's in conjunction with codes, energy codes that deal with, you know, minimum and maximum requirements when it comes to the thermal envelope?
Thank you. So one of the things that Edge does is that Edge takes the code. If there is a code in a specific country, that code becomes the baseline. So let's say in South Africa, the code requirements for building envelope is quite strict. Therefore, adding additional insulation to the code requirement does not add a lot of savings, right? The other fact in terms of the way that Edge looks at the building energy is that looks at the entire building energy consumption, including the consumption for the appliances, lighting, heating, cooling, all the elements. And then the savings that you receive by a better envelope normally contributes to savings on cooling or heating energy, but does not contribute to lighting or equipment or other energy consumptions, or cooking energy consumption, for example. Therefore, the percentage that you are seeing maybe is 2%, 3% saving for better insulation for the wall. But the other fact is that the building envelope, when we are talking, there are different elements of envelope. So we are talking about insulation of the wall, roof, better windows. So when you look at the entire building envelope or better ventilation, all of them together, they contribute quite high. But each of the elements may have a smaller contribution.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Didn't I hear that the part of the program was return on investment in addition to simply energy? Is that what I heard, Joe?
Correct, yeah.
And maybe one of the answers to most questions might be that the return on investment, once you get to that minimum code level, return on investment becomes very, very small. So therefore, it sounds like you look to other areas to find the value for the building owner, manager, for the country that you're in. It sounds like. Well done.
Absolutely, that's correct, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.